We are very honored to have you as an interview for this GISTeR, Korea Center for Gendered Innovation in Science and Technology Research. I'm going to introduce you a little bit for the audience information. So Professor Frank Kirchhoff is a leading neuroscientist from the University of Saarland. He's also an honorary president of the German Neuroscience Society, a member of Academia Europaea, and a co-founder of the Center for Gender-Specific Biology and Medicine. His groundbreaking work is truly shaping the world of gender-specific brain science. So, Professor Kirchhoff, would you introduce yourself a little bit and then your key research areas, please?
Well, thank you for the very nice words. Over the last 30 years, already during my PhD thesis, I started to work on molecules that are important for the interaction of cells in the nervous system. So my research area really addresses how do nerve cells and glial cells, and they come in different flavors, how do they interact? How do they contribute to brain function? And brain function we see as a change in behavior, right?
Well, very interesting. Let's dive into more into your fascinating research journey. So I would like to ask, what led you from traditional neuroscience to the fields to the gender-specific biology? What led you to get interested in those gender-specific biology and medicine? And was there any particular moment that made you have a key insight and motivate you?
Actually, it happened a few years ago in 2022, when we at the University of Saarland in Germany, when we discussed how can we better organize our research, and in particular, how can we better integrate PIs from different research fields. And then we were discussing how do organs communicate to each other. And for that purpose, during that discussion, we also looked at epidemiological studies. And as you can see, diseases vary over the age range. Dementia is more common in the elderly people. We also saw clear differences between the different genders, that male and female patients have different outcomes. And this was then the triggering point. And in particular, I'm working on glial cells, and one major glial cell type is multiple sclerosis, which is in which the myelination, the insulation of the axons, is impaired. Multiple sclerosis is 3 times more common in women than in men. So I said, well, let's look more specifically into these sex-specific differences as a consortium, as a network. And then we approached our government, so the state government, and we asked them for some support. And to receive financial support is still an ongoing procedure. However, we were very much encouraged to go ahead with this network. And then we really went through all the university hierarchical levels to set up the bylaws of a new center. And we called this Center for Gender-Specific Biology and Research. So it happened 3 years ago. And actually half a year later, after we had our first network meeting, the National Science Council of Germany announced we need more gender-specific research in Germany. So basically we were already ahead of time.
You're the pioneer of the field. So I also would like to ask more about your more recent work that you presented today on atrial GABA-B receptors, and the seizures have been groundbreaking. Would you please explain your key findings and their significance to our audience? Yeah. Can easily understand?
Well, we already discussed that I'm interested in multiple sclerosis, that myelin, so how axons get myelinated. And one of the current drugs which is given to patients with multiple sclerosis is baclofen. And baclofen is modulating GABA-B receptor function. So therefore, we set up to look at transgenic mouse models with a deletion or with a deficiency of the GABA B receptor in different cell types. So we have one project in oligodendrocytes, but the project which I presented today was in the astrocytes. And so on one hand, baclofen is a modulator of GABA B receptor function, but there's another modulator, which is gamma hydroxybutyric acid. Well, and I should explain that the GABA B receptor is a modulatory receptor which is expressed on many cell types, and it's activated by the inhibitory transmitter gamma aminobutyric acid. However, then there's gamma hydroxybutyric acid, and this is known as GHB or KO drops, or the component of this raping drug. There's an animal model in which GHB is used, and the animal model of the disease is, this is a model of absence seizures, so absence epilepsy. Under this situation, children with a disease with absence seizures are suddenly unconscious. And this can be mimicked by injecting gamma hydroxybutyric acid into mice. And we did this experiment, and we did this, in mice with an astrocyte-specific deficiency of the GABA B receptor, and in control mice. And then we found that this raping drug, GHB, gamma hydroxybutyric acid, is more sensitive in the female mice rather than in the male mice. And this might also translate how this drug is used by humans.
So you have already briefly mentioned about this, but why is it so crucial to consider sex and gender differences in the brain disorders? And what are the risks and consequences if we continue to ignore it when we research?
Well, we have the X and the Y chromosomes, and a few hundred genes are differentially expressed between the chromosomes. However, very often in our daily clinical work or research work, we just look at the sex hormone differences. However, if you have a few hundred genes, there are more differences. And there are not only differences based on the genes, but there are also differences in epigenetic modulation of the genome. So more other genes are affected. And so why is now this crucial? Well, we know that these differences generate more than 100 physiological parameters of our behavior. So we have sex-specific distribution of heart function, sex-specific differences in immune function, sex-specific differences in brain function. So this is what we already know, and all these physiological changes are even amplified under pathological situation. Yeah. So coming back to the gamma hydroxybutyric acid example, without gamma hydroxybutyric acid, we have a nice party. If we inject gamma hydroxybutyric acid to the wrong partner, we have a completely disastrous situation. So therefore, similarly, this happens in diseases. So diseases do amplify these sex-specific differences. And if we want to treat our patients in a proper manner, we have to apply drugs or treatments in a sex-specific manner. And this is very evident. For example, any drug, any small molecule has a different water-fat solubility. However, we are different, male and females are different in their body water ratio, in their fat and water ratio. So therefore the bioefficacy, the bioefficiency, the bioavailability of drugs is different in men and women. And this has to be addressed. So therefore, if we are not considering sex-specific differences, we do not treat patient in a way that we should do. So we are still under suboptimal conditions.
Totally agree. I'd like to also ask you about the center that you founded, the Center for Gender-Specific Biology and Medicine. Can you tell us about the process of establishing the center and the challenges you may faced in integrating gender-specific research into scientific community in Germany?
Well, basically the center started as a bottom-up approach. So scientists, PIs, we were, at the very beginning, we were just 4 PIs discussing how to set it up. Sorry. And then, you know, we were encouraged, actually just the 4 of us, or 3 of us then went to the minister and presented the project. And then we could convince other principal investigators of the university from different research areas, from life sciences to clinical research. And we, however, to set up a center at our university, we had to formally install it with respective bylaws. So we have a proper board of members, so a directing structure. We have a scientific advisory board, etc. And all this has to go through the university hierarchical levels. And we went through, and then we had our first network symposium where we appeared publicly. This was, it took some time. However, this was easy. But the major challenge is if you want to do research, and now you do not only investigate male or female mice or rats, but also the other sex, then you have to do more research. And now this requires more resources. So now we have to convince grant agencies, governments, etc., to provide these resources. And this is where we are working hard on, and I think we already succeed to a certain extent. So the German grant agency is donating 12 million euros to 20 PIs over the next 6 years. So this is one part. I have discussions with our state government also to set up a new research building. Another project with this is a little bit more complicated, as you might imagine, but we all have to run around and to be ambassadors of better science. So I think that if you consider sex-specific differences in your research, you are doing better and more impactful science.
Continuing asking about that ambassador work. So in addition to your science, you are a prominent ambassador for this integrating sex and gender into our scientific inquiry in the countries like China and Japan already. So we'd like to hear about this journey.
I'm, over the last 10-15 years, I was involved in European grant programs, but also in grant programs together with Japan, together with Brazil, and together with China. So and then at these meetings, I discussed with my colleagues that we are setting up a Center for Gender-Specific Biology and Medicine in Homburg. And then some of the colleagues got excited about it and said, oh, we should have a similar center also at our university. So, and then just by historical reasons, how fast I met the respective colleagues. Meanwhile, we set up centers in Chengdu, China, in Nanjing, and in Suzhou, but also in Campinas in Brazil. And I'm still talking to people or colleagues in Japan and Canada and France. So I think this is ongoing discussion. And you have to imagine we just started 3 years ago. So we are working on it, and I think our speed is not bad.
Yeah, I think it's fast. So from your experience, what would be the most effective strategies for persuading the scientific society community and funding agencies as well to adopt sex and gender aware?
I think to convince colleagues, it's not so complicated. So the colleagues, if you provide some examples where the differences are there, and meanwhile it's not only me who are discussing sex-specific differences. There are many other colleagues around the world who are also doing this, who are also readjusting their research and looking at sex-specific difference, in particular in the field of single-cell transcriptomics, and in some disease stages. So colleagues are doing it. Let's say I'm doing it differently in the sense that I say, well, not only you have to look at it, but you have to put up a program at your university. So you have to set up, let's say, a network. And this network at a university I call Center of Gender-Specific Biology and Medicine. So basically this is one term which can have different meanings. At our place, it means this network, and finally with our own research institute, with our own research building. This is my major aim. However, now at the other universities, it can be a virtual association of colleagues, of PIs, just presented at their website, and then just saying, we are careful, we are aware of sex-specific differences. So to do this, to organize networks at the individual university, this again requires commitment of individual colleagues, and basically you have to find them, and this is a matter of personal interaction. This works, I think, quite well. And then the next step is to convince grant agencies. Well, and the grant agencies, I think in Europe, they are well aware of it. So that's not, so they're aware of it. It is just a matter of reassigning resources, reassigning budgets. We are working on this. To get up a new research building is the next step of complexity. We are also working on it, but this is something which has to go together. We also have, we started the project, or we started the centers. Sorry. But then these centers have to show that they are doing better science. So this means that the PIs of a center have to publish, and the affiliation has to be a Center for Gender-Specific Biology and Medicine. And then, after 5 years or so, then they show, well, these are our publications before we did our change in research, and this is what we did 5 years after. And then you see, look at the impact factors, or look at the citation frequencies. This would be a clear proof that if you consider sex-specific differences, that you are doing better research. I'm convinced that this will take place, and I'm convinced that this research has a higher impact, and if it has a higher impact, you can publish in more visible journals.
Extending the question, given your ambassadorship in Asia, is not outside of Europe, what are the primary challenges and opportunities you've observed in a country like Asia, like Korea, for advancing gender-integrated research in neuroscience? And what would be the specific message to Korean neuroscientists who are considering this field?
In my field, so I was discussing to colleagues, I think, meanwhile, all over the world, in Canada, in North America, South America, Asia. So if I'm talking to scientists, there's no big difference among scientists around the world. There's still some, let's say, research organizations, research hierarchies are different all over the world. So, and some hierarchies respond faster than others. So since the German hierarchy is slow in comparison to, for example, the Chinese hierarchy, so the establishment of the 3 centers in China went faster than establishing it in Germany. So in Korea, we discussed the situation that we would like to have a similar center here in Korea. I think it really, it is important to have leading scientists that are really dedicated to this idea and then they have to talk to university presidents, to politicians, etc., to make it run. And also not only talking to university president, but also to talk to colleagues. So we need people who can persuade colleagues. So it's basically, the obstacles are not structurally, the obstacles are you have to find individuals, and you have to bypass interpersonal obstacles, interpersonal conflicts. So therefore, if you have someone who is really, who can convince people, then it's getting fast.
And then we'll move to the questions about like policies and then research infrastructures. You have already mentioned that you are trying to have your own building to would like to have own building for gender and sex specific based medical researches. And from your perspective, what research infrastructure or policy support is required to make sex and gender integrated research as a standard practice, not an exception?
Well, I think we really have to form this network of PIs covering different fields. It can start, let's say, at the neuroscience department, focusing on brain diseases, but it can then expand it to the medical faculty, covering all aspects of cardiology, immunology, covering different diseases. And from the medical faculty, it can expand to the life science, natural science faculty, and then it can really affect the whole university. And from one university, it can spread over to the whole country. So I think this is the way. So I think, first of all, we need a network of scientists doing it. And then they will, since they will do better research, and this will be seen by the others. And therefore, they have advantage in our competing fields, right? We all are competitors to a certain extent. But if you find an advantage in this competitive race, people will look at you and then try to copy it. So I think this is the main point, to have a network. The next point is then to interact with the grant agencies and with the university, with the state government or national government, to have more infrastructure resources, like a dedicated research institute. If you have a dedicated research institute, a dedicated building, then this also acts as a role model into all the other cities of a country, or also into the other countries. So therefore, network, infrastructure. Well, network, financial resources to do experiments at the place where you currently are, and then the best scientists who are doing such research then combine the best scientists in their own building so that they can more dynamically, more effectively interact.
In addition to that, we also like to ask about the importance of the education or evaluation systems and editorial policies in the journals in making gender-aware research as a new norm. Can you also comment on?
Well, I think this comes automatically. I think I do believe in the quality of science in general, and I do believe that if scientists addressed sex-specific differences, as I already repeatedly said, they do better research, and then they convince also the editors that this is the case. And if you are a network, and let's say you can then go also for a review article, for special issue in journal, so therefore you have a direct, you can be impactful to address publishing houses, and simultaneously you can use the very same strategy to affect grant agencies. That you say, well, look, we are working together on this topic and we need also more resources. Let's say you are in one country, you have a center, and then you say, well, look at this center in the other country, it's running successfully. So if we also want to have a similar thing, and I think at one point of time, if you do better science, I think in most of the countries, politicians like that.
Okay, so to wrapping up our interview, would you like to hear your thoughts for the future? So what advice would you give to young scientists who want to start research that reflects sex and gender differences?
Well, I think, first of all, to become a scientist is great. I think as a scientist, you have unlimited options. And however, to get a tenured position, you do not only have to be a scientist as such, but you have to do impactful research. And it is very clear over the last years that you can do better research when you address sex-specific, gender-specific differences. And just imagine, you can also explain your research much better if you say, well, men and women pay taxes, I'm paid by the taxpayer, and I do research for both taxpayers, for the female and the male taxpayers. So I will be, I will work for you and not only for me. So I think you will become a better scientist, and to be a scientist is one of the greatest jobs we have.
So let me ask you one fun imagining question. If we were met again in 2035, what breakthroughs would you hope to see in sex and gender-based neuroscience?
This is very easy. I come back to my very first beginning talking about multiple sclerosis. So in my presentation, I presented that the brain regions in men and women are differently connected within an hemisphere and between hemispheres. And this connection has something to do with myelination. And myelination is affected in multiple sclerosis. So if you are talking about the year 2035, for me it would be nice we have a better strategy to treat multiple sclerosis. And I think by searching for better strategies, we will also learn more about why are the different brain hemispheres, or why are the two hemispheres differentially connected between men and women. So therefore, we will address these both things. So why is the brain in men and women differentially connected? And how does this, and how can this knowledge be used for better therapy in multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, just by imagining, I'm already got excited. So before we really conclude, Professor Kirchhoff, is there any final message you would like to give us to share?
Well, I already mentioned that to become a scientist is great. It's rewarding, and you, as a scientist, you can establish friendships all over the world. And if you do important science, it is even easier to get the resources to travel around the world and to make friends all over, and you are contributing to a better world. So become a scientist, and if you address sex-specific differences, you will be a better scientist.
Thank you very much, Professor Kirchhoff, for sharing your invaluable insight and vision today. This conversation will undoubtedly inspire scientists and policymakers worldwide, including Korea, to think more deeply about the critical roles of sex and gender-specific medicine and biosciences. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions and for having me here.